The chandelier's crystals tremble as the steamy summer air presses against the windows of Bell Manor's dining hall. A single candelabra casts long shadows over the polished mahogany table, where 12 finely dressed guests lift their crystal goblets in a toast. Outside, cicadas drone in relentless chorus. Inside, the clang of silverware and low laughter weave a fragile veneer of hospitality. To family reclaimed, intones Mrs. Eleanor Bell, her voice smooth as the peach nectar in her glass. She smiles, too wide, revealing a row of carefully maintained teeth. Glasses chime, and the amber wine swirls like liquid fire under the flickering flame. A stray drop splashes onto Colonel Ridley's cuff. He tastes it, frowns, then coughs once. Sharp, echoing through the hall, his hand tightens around the goblet stem. His knuckles whiten. The doctor across the table leans forward, concern creasing his brow before Colonel Ridley staggers, chest heaving, and collapses onto the lace tablecloth. The crystal shatters, scattering ruby droplets across the runner. Gasps rise. Candles quiver. Miss Abigail Crowley clutches her throat, eyes rolling back as though she sees something in the darkness. She sways, lips parted in a silent shriek, then slumps sideways, her plate clattering to the floor. Panic ignites. Chairs scrape on polished boards. Silk skirts rustle like warning flags. Mrs. Bell's composed facade cracks. She lifts her voice to command aid, but no words come. The chandelier shudders violently, and the ancient table groans, seam splitting at its center. From the fracture seeps a whisper, low and cold as grave soil. You have taken what is not yours. Flames gutter, plunging faces into half-light. 11 pairs of eyes widen in horror, as one by one they falter, heartbeats fading against the haunted echo of that whispered accusation. The grand feast becomes a silent nightmare, and Bell Manor's walls hold witness to a horror no one at the table will live to forget. Before we dig into this chilling feast, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Then tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Tonight's tale takes you inside Bell Manor's grand dining hall, where 12 guests gathered to toast family restored, and one by one collapsed under a curse forged by secrets at the dinner table. Unseen forces masked as wine turned hospitality into horror. Over the next hour we'll unpack every cryptic clue. The fractured table, the whispered warnings, and the dark legacy that bound the Bells. Ready your courage. The Feast of Shadows is about to begin. In the humid October twilight of 1870, the grand facade of Bell Manor stood like a memory of old wealth on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. Its whitewashed columns rose 3 stories above manicured boxwood hedges, and a broad veranda wrapped around the house like an alabaster embrace. The low rows of enslaved oaks planted generations earlier stretched their gnarled limbs toward the sky, leaves flickering gold in the sinking sun. Just 5 years had passed since the Civil War's end, yet the manor's walls still bore the scars of conflict. Cannon shot had pocked the shutters. Bloodstains now washed away had seeped into the floorboards in what was once the ballroom. The Bells, who once rode past these gates in a stately coach, had watched Yankee troops quarter in their halls and plantations seized by carpetbaggers. By 1870, Benjamin Bell, patriarch, former Confederate captain, and owner of this plantation, had clawed his way back to prosperity. Through cotton and turpentine, he had repurchased swaths of land and rehired familiar sharecroppers. The restored fields now bore neatly tasseled stalks, and the manor's lick of fresh paint gleamed in relief against the weary southern sky. On this evening, Benjamin's wife Eleanor oversaw preparations for a feast meant to celebrate their reunion with old friends and foster new alliance. Eleanor was slender and reserved, with gray-flecked hair pinned in a tight coil. Though her skirts rustled of silk and lace, her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of a woman who had nursed the wounded, buried the dead, and then thrown herself into salvaging a shattered fortune. Her gentle voice, dulled by loss, still carried the inflection of a Charleston debut. They gathered in the great dining hall, a lofty room hung with family portraits whose subjects gazed down from gilded frames, stern ancestors in cravats, war hero forebears clutching sabers, widowed matriarchs with sorrow-pale cheek. Beneath a glittering chandelier of German crystal, a long mahogany table rebuilt using boards from the old slave quarters was set with gleaming silver, china embossed with the bell crest, and goblets of fine French crystal. The guests represented the delicate tapestry of Reconstruction-era society. At the head of the table sat Judge Samuel Worthington, his wig still powdered, though his wealth had been diminished by 5 years of occupation. Beside him, Ambrose Blythe, an enterprising Union surgeon turned local physician, adjusted his spectacles while clearing his throat. Opposite, plantation owner Horace Tatum, who once hailed from Georgia, nodded politely, cane tapping against the parquet floor. Along the sides sat 2 schoolmarms in modest black, 2 prosperous black sharecroppers in Sunday suits, and 1 Yankee banker in a coal-black frock coat. Eleanor stood behind her husband's chair, hands folded over an embroidered apron. She offered a curtsy of welcome, voice steady. "Friends, neighbors, and allies, welcome to Bell Manor. May tonight's offerings bring warmth to hearth and heart alike." A murmur of thanks rose in polite cadence. Benjamin lifted his goblet, nodding once, to new beginning. Crystal rang against crystal. The first course, oysters Rockefeller, followed by roast quail and sweet potato timbale, was served by a small cadre of white-clad servants. Outside, the cicadas fell silent, as though in respect for the banquet within. A steady breeze rustled the magnolia trees beyond the veranda, carrying the scent of jasmine and failing blooms. As the guests ate, conversation wove between cautious alliances and guarded memory. Judge Worthington spoke of upcoming elections, promising that Southern rights would be restored through lawful means. Dr. Blythe recounted his success inoculating freedmen against yellow fever. Horace Tatum leaned forward to share news of railway expansion, hopeful that new lines would breathe commerce into the region. At the table's center, Eleanor observed each newcomer, measuring their smiles and watching for any flicker of old resentments. She nodded congenially to Mrs. Estelle Morris, whose family had once owned a neighboring plantation lost to wartime debts. Estelle's cool blue eyes held a kindness that belied scars from the carpetbag years. The 2 women had buried more than one patriarch and now shared the burden of rebuilding their lives from ashes. Toward the table's far end sat 2 younger guests, 20-something twins named Clara and Joseph Bell, Benjamin's niece and nephew visiting from New York. Their pale faces and city accents marked them as Northern belles, returned to claim family heritage. They whispered to each other in soft voices, casting uncertain glances at the portraits of stern Confederate officers overhead. Yet when Elder Benjamin caught their eye, he offered a wry smile and raised an eyebrow, as if to say, "We are one family, regardless of." After the second course, creamy gumbo brimming with catfish and okra, the conversation turned quiet as the long tea table was cleared and dessert set in its place. A grand blanc manger molded into the shape of the Bell family crest stood at the table's center, flanked by ginger-spiced pecan tarts and candied figs. The chandelier sparkled above like fallen stars. It was then that Benjamin rose to speak again. He cleared his throat, voice echoing in the vaulted hall. "Before we partake, let us offer gratitude to those who remained, to those who returned, to those who, though gone, still watch over us." A hush fell. In the corner, old Violet, an elderly former housekeeper dismissed by necessity after emancipation, sighed heavily. She wore a black bonnet and held her cane like a staff, eyes fixed on the hearth's glowing ember. Benjamin continued, "This feast honors our survival and, God willing, our future. May hospitality heal wounds time has not yet closed." He raised his glass again. The guests obeyed, bolts of flickering candlelight dancing across their faces. A thin smile tugged at Eleanor's lips, gratitude, relief, lingering dread. As forks descended once more, a single servant slipped into a side hallway and peered through a crack in the door. Outside, the wind sighed through the oaks and the rattling of a shutter hinted at secrets waiting beyond the manor's walls. No one at the table noticed the servant's pallid face, or the glint of something metallic held tightly in her hand. The storm that had been gathering in the bayou's shadow moved imperceptibly closer, carrying with it a curse woven from old sins, and the Bell family's last feast was only beginning. 2 nights after the grand feast at Bell Manor, a silence hung over Charleston like a shroud. The cicadas had fallen still, and the great oaks whispered warnings in the humid dusk. Eleanor Bell woke before dawn, unsettled by a dream in which 12 chairs surrounded an empty table, and 12 silent faces stared back at her through flickering candlelight. That morning, as the household stirred, a servant delivered an elegantly penned envelope to the library's mahogany desk. The seal bore a curious crest, a raven clutching a key, impressioned in black wax. Eleanor broke the seal with trembling fingers, unfolding the heavy parchment. "Mrs. Eleanor Bell, you are cordially invited to an intimate supper at Ravenwood Hall this coming Saturday at dusk. Our mutual acquaintance, Dr. Ambrose Blythe, suggested the reunion, a companion piece to your recent gathering, where family and society entwined so fruitfully. Your presence is requested and rewarded. A friend of the house." She read the lines twice. Ravens and keys, symbols of death and secrets unlocked. A friend of the house, no name, no address. Yet she recalled that Dr. Blythe had mentioned his cousin's estate, newly inherited, just beyond the Ashley River. She folded the note and pressed it to her chest. Rumors through the ranks. Word of the cryptic invitation spread through the manor's staff by supper. In the kitchen, cook Mammy Louisa paused over her gumbo pot, eyes narrowing. "Ravenwood, that name gives me chill. Folks say the last master died at the table, cursed by his own father's wrongs." In the servant quarters, the scullery maids whispered of Ravenwood's spectral lights, lanterns drifting in the fog, as if searching for something lost. One claimed her grandmother saw a pale figure at the window, hand raised, beckoning through the glass. Benjamin, reading over Eleanor's shoulder at dinner, frowned. "Ambrose has impeccable taste, but why cloak his invitation in mystery? Best not go alone." Eleanor met his gaze. "I'll take Clara and Joseph. Their New York manners will spare us gossip." A scholar's warning. That evening, Dr. Ambrose Blythe arrived at Bell Manor, footsteps echoing in the marble-floored vestibule. He greeted Eleanor with practiced warmth, though his eyes glinted with curiosity at the raven seal in her hand. "Surprised?" he asked, voice low. Over brandy in the study, he admitted the cousin, Professor Thaddeus Blythe, had commissioned the supper, but insisted on discretion. He wanted to see your gathering for himself but feared a large party, so he sends word the evening will be intimate, no more than 8 guests. Eleanor studied him. "And the raven and key?" Ambrose hesitated. "Family legend says the raven carries secrets from the grave, and the key unlocks what the dead have hidden." He tapped the seal. "He's deeply interested in your family's storied past, and in Dr. Blythe's surgical accounts." The doctor set down his glass. "He promises revelation if you attend. Beware. Ravenwood Hall is old, steeped in its own tragedies. Do not mistake history for hospitality. Omens in the garden. On Thursday, Eleanor strolled the rose garden with Joseph, the Northbourne nephew. The morning dew clung to petals, yet the air felt too still. A single black raven, feathered wings splayed, rested atop a white magnolia branch, watching her with bright eyes. Joseph gasped as it spread its wings and took flight into a low-hung cloud. Clara, arriving with tea, found her aunt staring skyward as slipped from her hands. A raven in the roses. Dr. Blythe warned of this. Should we mail regrets? Eleanor shook her head. Ravens thrive where secrets rot, good omen or bad. We pressed. A letter from the past. That afternoon, Butler Farrow found an aged envelope in the library's ledger desk, tucked between plantation receipts. He handed it to Eleanor, suggesting it might be relevant. Inside, a brittle letter in faded ink. Dearest father, forgive me for what I must do. By the time you read this, I will have sealed our fortunes or our doom. The table we broke together binds us still. On this night we are repaid. Look to Ravenwood. Bury the truth in the East Wing cellar. The letter claimed the table had bound their fate, and that Ravenwood's East cellar held the evidence. Shadowed preparations. Friday dawned in morning gray. Eleanor summoned Clara and Joseph. She revealed Elizabeth's letter and the Raven seal invitation. Over a tray of toasted crumpets, she outlined her plan. We go to Ravenwood. We discover what Elizabeth left behind. We break the chain before dinner turns deadly. Clara shivered. You mean the table itself is cursed? Joseph clenched his jaw. If it killed one Bell ancestor, what will it do to us? Eleanor met their eyes. We'll find out, and survive. Benjamin will send Pharaoh and his men to stand by the kitchens. At the first sign of trouble, we'll retreat. The eve of the feast. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her silk sheets. The wind rattled the shutters, and the portrait of Betsy Bell, the painting hung opposite her bed, seemed to leer in the gloom. In the flicker of candlelight, Betsy's lips appeared to curl in a knowing smile. Eleanor turned away, heart thundering. Downstairs in the darkened hallway, a servant heard soft footsteps approach the gallery door. She peered through the knothole, only to see the canvas's eyes follow her. Shaking, she bolted back to her quarters. As dawn broke, the invitation awaited its reply, written in Eleanor's hand. We accept. With that brief note affixed to Pharaoh's plate, the Bell family and their curious guests prepared to cross the river to Ravenwood Hall. None yet realized that the table around which they would dine had memories sharper than any blade, and that the last feast would demand a reckoning centuries in the making. A low September sun bled through the towering oaks as Eleanor Bell's carriage rattled up Ravenwood Hall's winding drive. The estate loomed, blackened cypress beams sagging under Spanish moss, windows shuttered like watchful eyes. Joseph and Clara Bell followed in a second coach, their city finery at odds with the peeling facade. Behind them came Dr. Ambrose Blythe, Judge Samuel Worthington, school teachers Martha Reeves and Lydia Pruitt, and two prosperous sharecroppers, Elijah Turner and Selena Dupree, each summoned by that raven-sealed invitation to partake in a dinner, promising revelation and restoration. Inside, the grand hall's rafters stretched 20 feet high, carved with ancient vines and crowned by a tarnished chandelier. A long table of oaken planks, marred by centuries of secret pacts, ran its length. At its center lay a folded damask cloth, stamped with Betsy Bell's coat of arms, a raven clutching a key. 7 place settings flanked each side. One at the table's head bore a gilded charger, reserved for the host, threateningly empty. Eleanor paused on the threshold, hand to the raven-etched door. Joseph squeezed her shoulder. We must see this through, he whispered. She nodded, swallowing anxiety, as they stepped into candlelit gloom. A stranger at the table's head sat a lone figure draped in a dark cloak, their unknown host. He rose as the guests entered, revealing high cheekbones and a slate-gray mask obscuring his features. In one hand he held a bronze key, identical to the raven's talon imprint on the invitation. "Welcome," he intoned. Voice neither young nor old. "I am your humble host. I ask only that you place trust in memory and in me." He bowed, then revealed his face. Professor Thaddeus Blythe, Ambrose's reclusive cousin. His pale eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "Tonight we dine on truth and fate," he concluded, sitting. The first course and toast. A hush fell. Two servants glided in with platters of turtle soup, its surface garnished with a ring of bay leaves. Eleanor and her company raised silver spoons. Thaddeus offered a thin smile and lifted a goblet of pale Sauvignon. "To ancestral bonds, both those we cherish and those we must break." Glasses chimed. Eleanor sipped. A surge of warmth bloomed in her chest. Joseph tasted the soup, savoring its smoky depth. Judge Worthington nodded approval. Even Elijah Turner murmured, "Fine broth." Martha Reeves set down her spoon. "Remarkable flavor," she said before her gaze blurred. She clutched the edge of her napkin, brow furrowing. Clara, watching, saw Martha's cheeks flush green. Without a word the teacher rose and fled through a side door, leaving her plate and spoon steaming. Strange symptoms unfold. Silence gripped the hall. Thaddeus inclined his head. "Excuse her, please. The soup can unsettle unfamiliar constitutions." He gestured to Selina Dupree. She brushed her wrist against her throat, eyes watering. I feel lightheaded," she gasped, and lowered into her chair, hand pressed to her chest. Next, Judge Worthington touched his throat, then his vision dimmed. He coughed twice, small drops of crimson forming at his lips. Odd, given the pale broth. Dr. Blythe sprang forward, inspecting the judge. "No injury," he declared, but the judge's hand jerked spasmodically before he slumped, unconscious but breathing. Eleanor's knuckles whitened on the table. "Martha? Selina?" Clara moved to help, but Thaddeus raised a hand. "Patience. There is meaning in every symptom." The second course arrives. On cue, silver-clad servers carried in the second course. Quail roasted with sorghum glaze, paired with buttered turnips and roasted sweet potatoes. The aroma should have been comfort. Instead, it felt like a summons. Eleanor, Joseph, and Blythe hesitated, then tasted. Joseph's lips twitched as a bitter tang pierced the glaze. Dr. Blythe murmured, "No toxins detected," then blinked and his hand trembled. Clara placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's arm, but Eleanor only shook her head, enthralled by the unfolding ritual. Thaddeus tapped his fork thrice on the table. Instantly, everyone recovered enough to sit upright as the head teacher, Martha, returned, pale but steady, bearing 2 small jars of pickled okra. "Digestives," Thaddeus explained, "to prepare us for the feast's heart." Whispers beneath candlelight. As glasses refilled and conversation stumbled, soft whispers spread beneath the candlelight. Clara pressed her napkin to her lips, steeling herself against rising nausea. In the far corner, a tapestry shifted. No breeze stirred. Joseph noticed a portrait split down its center, the image of Betsy Bell torn in two, as though dividing her very soul. He pointed. Eleanor followed. The tear had not been there in any painting, Eleanor recalled. Dr. Blythe rose for light, examining the tapestry's back. He discovered a hidden inscription in ink-black script. "At the Lord's Supper, betrayal leaves its mark. Take heed, the table tells truth to the damned." Before he could speak, a soft clink rang out. Selina's spoon dropped. She stared at her plate. "My sweet potatoes, they move." Indeed, the turnips rolled across the dish as though driven by an unseen hand. Each vegetable nudged the other toward the platter's edge. Selina balked. Martha gasped. The quail legs leapt as though dancing. Joseph lunged for Selina's arm, but the plate spun and shattered, sending shards across the table. Tension and revelation. Thaddeus stood and strode down the table, eyes sweeping each face. "The table remembers," he said quietly. "It knows the sins that stained its wood." Tonight's meal is a reckoning." Eleanor rose, voice trembling. "What is this game? Why torture us?" Thaddeus laid a hand on her shoulder. "Not torture. Remembrance. Betsy Bell's wrongs echo through time. You stand in her legacy. Only by witnessing the table's memory can you claim redemption." He motioned again, and servants brought fruit platters, figs, muscadines, and slices of moonlit quince. As they ate, each guest's symptoms intensified. Martha's vision blurred into the faces of long-dead diners. Judge Worthington heard the clink of ghostly silver. Selina felt phantom hands clutch her shoulders. Dr. Blythe heard faint weeping beneath the floorboards. Joseph turned to Dr. Blythe. "Your family's secrets brought us here?" Dr. Blythe nodded grimly. "Thaddeus sought to expose what Betsy Bell concealed. We are the witnesses, the unseen observer." In the hall's flickering shadows, a lone raven perched atop a shuttered window, its bright eye fixed on the guest. Its feathers glimmered with the reflection of 1,000 candles. Beneath it, the table groaned. Clara noticed the servants retreating to the edges of the room, reluctant to draw too close. One servant tripped over a rug and fell face first uninjured, but speechless as though the table's presence had silenced her. The night's crescendo. As the final torch was brought in, flaming logs for the hearth, Thaddeus raised his glass to truth's unveiling. Glasses rose with trembling hands. They drank the fig's honeyed wine, sweet as temptation. Then, as if on cue, a slow crack sounded from beneath the table's feet. The mahogany split lengthwise, spider webbing from end to end. Guests recoiled. The ribbon seam that once concealed a decorative knot now lay exposed, its grain twisted into a coffin-like latch. A low voice echoing from the fracture in tone. The guests gazed at one another in horror, realizing they had become part of a feast not meant for the living. And as the crack widened, the table's hidden past threatened to swallow them all in its final silent judgment. As the splinter in the mahogany gaped wider, the flickering chandelier cast long, jittering shadows across Ravenwood Hall's dining chamber. The low voice, barely more than a breath, echoed, "Justice comes hungry." In that suspended moment, Judge Worthington clutched at his chest and buckled in his chair, wine-soaked cuff hedging his descent. Blythe lunged forward but found only empty air. The judge's chair lay abandoned. The man vanished as though wrenched into another realm. A collective gasp roared through the hall, drowning out the panicked flutter of lace and silk. Martha Reeves stood so suddenly that her chair tipped backward, clattering against the parquet floor. She vomited beside the shattered platter of figs, slender legs pumping in futile effort to maintain balance as her eyes rolled skyward. Clara Bell dropped her napkin as plates began to tremble and jump on the tablecloth, sliding toward the ledger-deep seam as if drawn by unseen magnetism. Glasses teetered, then crashed, sending shards of crystal and red wine spraying across the carved crest of the raven and key. Selina Dupree screamed as the turnip dish levitated, spinning in midair before hurtling itself at the eastern wall with a deafening crack that splintered wainscot. Selina backed into Joseph, whose gasp turned into a strangled cry as he felt invisible fingers clamp around his ankle. He staggered forward, then vanished too, swallowed by the darkness behind the buffet sideboard. In an instant, 2 chairs sat empty, 2 bodies gone without a trace. Eleanor Bell found her voice amid the chaos. "Dr. Blythe, Dr. Blythe, help me." She lunged across the table, but the second service of roast quail erupted in flames, the sorghum glaze igniting with angry orange tongues. Smoke coiled toward the low ceiling, setting the chandelier's crystal prisms to singing. The heat flared, the chandelier quivered, a pane of window glass exploded outward. Rain from the gathering storm sluicing into the hall. Dr. Blythe sprang to his feet, pulling a linen napkin from his pocket to stanch Martha's lip wound. "Doctor," came a frightened whisper. "Where are they going?" He turned to find Dr. Blythe's own reflection in a broken mirror. a pale, gaunt man clutching empty air where the judge once sat. He swallowed hard. "I don't know," he rasped, "but it's hungry for us." Clara whirled, searching for Joseph. The hearth glowed with unnatural emerald light, casting the hall in hellish hues. A distant wail, Martha's, echoed down the corridor. She had fled the room, footsteps echoing on marble as she pursued a specter glimpsed at the archway. Clara started to follow, but Elijah Turner caught her arm, eyes ablaze. "Stay here. We'll find them," he barked. He charged past her only to vanish through the fractured table itself, stepping into a jagged seam as though crossing a threshold. The table's edge closed behind him with a grinding snap. Selena Dupree collapsed beside the open window, trembling. She tried to stand, but the cypress-carved floors shifted beneath her feet. A plank lifted like a coffin lid, then slammed back down. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the storm rattling the glass shards. Eleanor's knuckles whitened on the edge of the broken table. She caught Dr. Blythe's eye, and together they backed toward the grand doors, only to find them locked. The keys hung from Edward, the butler, who had run for them, yet the lock would not turn. He fell to his knees, shaking the key ring as though the table's curse seeped into even metal. From the far end, Professor Thaddeus Blythe emerged into the flickering torchlight, his mask removed, face pale but composed. "Stay calm," he commanded, voice eerily measured. He lifted the bronze key and advanced into the key returns what the table has claimed, but only if we confront it together. He stooped before the fracture and inserted the talisman into the grain, turning it one. The table groaned, seam contracting, but a shrill scream tore through the hall as Martha Reeves returned. Her eyes rolled back, chanting "They feast upon our fear." Her words awakened fresh terror. The chandelier crashed, glass and iron raining down. Eleanor ducked, arms raised. When she looked up, only 4 guests remained: herself, Dr. Blythe, Clara and Professor Blythe, Selena, Joseph, Elijah and Judge Worthington gone. Martha collapsed in spasm, the judge's chair empty and cold. A final crack split the tabletop. From the seam a skeletal hand emerged, clutching a silver fork. It twitched toward Martha's motionless form, pricking her cheek. She jerked awake with a howl snapping out of trance. Her eyes met, Eleanor's fear and frenzy intermingled. "We must destroy it," she shrieked. "Destroy the table." Dr. Blythe shook his head. "No, the keys turning slowed it, but we need the ceremony's end. The binding, the remembrance." Eleanor swallowed, heart pounding. She stepped forward, speaking to the fractured wood. "Betsy Bell, we remember, we repent. Release your children." At her words, the raven crest glowed a dim ember. With effort, Professor Blythe turned the key once more. The skeletal hand retreated. The seam began to close, but the wood splintered, sending shards toward the guests like splinters of memory. Selena, Mason's sharecropper, regained her feet and picked up the chain of cypress cones from beneath the table. She dashed across the hall, flinging cones into the crack. Each one hissed as it touched the wood, exhaling acrid smoke. The fissure shrank, rejecting the cones, until with a final thunderous snap, it welded itself shut, leaving only a zigzag scar across the tabletop. Silence followed, a heavy, choking hush. The candles flickered back to life. The doors creaked open. Outside, rain sluiced over marble steps. The storm had broken. Inside, the table sat whole again, but its grain bore the wound of its witness. One by one, the remaining guests, Clara supporting Martha, Blythe aiding Judge Worthington, Selena and Elijah, emerging from shadow, found themselves reduced trembling survivors. Around that silent board, the final guest, Eleanor Bell, stood alone at the head, eyes fixed on the ravaged wood where laughter had turned to death. Ravenwood Hall had reclaimed its secret, and the Bell family's last feast had become their darkest hour. As the splinter in the mahogany gaped wider, the flickering chandelier cast long, jittering shadows across Ravenwood Hall's dining chamber. The low voice, barely more than a breath, echoed, "Justice comes hungry. In that suspended moment, Judge Worthington clutched at his chest and buckled in his chair, wine-soaked cuff hedging his descent. Blythe lunged forward but found only empty air. The judge's chair lay abandoned. The man vanished as though wrenched into another realm. A collective gasp roared through the hall, drowning out the panicked flutter of lace and silk. Martha Reeves stood so suddenly that her chair tipped backward, clattering against the parquet floor. She vomited beside the shattered platter of figs, slender legs pumping in futile effort to maintain balance as her eyes rolled skyward. Clara Bell dropped her napkin as plates began to tremble and jump on the tablecloth, sliding toward the ledger deep seam as if drawn by unseen magnetism. Glasses teetered, then crashed, sending shards of crystal and red wine spraying across the carved crest of the Raven and Key. Selena Dupree screamed as the turnip dish levitated, spinning in midair before hurtling itself at the eastern wall with a deafening crack that splintered wainscot. Selena backed into Joseph, whose gasp turned into a strangled cry as he felt invisible fingers clamp around his ankle. He staggered forward, then vanished too, swallowed by the darkness behind the buffet sideboard. In an instant, 2 chairs sat empty, 2 bodies gone without a trace. Eleanor Bell found her voice amid the chaos. Dr. Blythe, Dr. Blythe, help me. She lunged across the table, but the second service of roast quail erupted in flames, the sorghum glaze igniting with angry orange tongues. Smoke coiled toward the low ceiling, setting the chandelier's crystal prisms to singing. The heat flared, the chandelier quivered, a pane of window glass exploded outward, rain from the gathering storm sluicing into the hall. Dr. Blythe sprang to his feet, pulling a linen napkin from his pocket to stanch Martha's lip wound. "Doctor," came a frightened whisper. "Where are they going?" He turned to find Dr. Blythe's own reflection in a broken mirror, a pale, gaunt man clutching empty air where the judge once sat. He swallowed hard. "I don't know," he rasped, "but it's hungry for us." Clara whirled, searching for Joseph. The hearth glowed with unnatural emerald light, casting the hall in hellish hues. A distant wail, Martha's, echoed down the corridor. She had fled the room, footsteps echoing on marble as she pursued a specter glimpsed at the archway. Clara started to follow, but Elijah Turner caught her arm, eyes ablaze. "Stay here. We'll find them," he barked. He charged past her only to vanish through the fractured table itself, stepping into a jagged seam as though crossing a threshold. The table's edge closed behind him with a grinding snap. Selena Dupree collapsed beside the open window, trembling. She tried to stand, but the cypress-carved floor shifted beneath her feet. A plank lifted like a coffin lid, then slammed back down. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the storm rattling the glass shards. Eleanor's knuckles whitened on the edge of the broken table. She caught Dr. Blythe's eye, and together they backed toward the grand doors, only to find them locked. The keys hung from Edward, the butler, who had run for them, yet the lock would not turn. He fell to his knees, shaking the key ring as though the table's curse seeped into even metal. From the far end, Professor Thaddeus Blythe emerged into the flickering torchlight, his mask removed, face pale but composed. "Stay calm," he commanded, voice eerily measured. He lifted the bronze key and advanced into the key returns what the table has claimed, but only if we confront it together. He stooped before the fracture and inserted the talisman into the grain, turning it one. The table groaned, seam contracting, but a shrill scream tore through the hall as Martha Reeves returned. Her eyes rolled back, chanting in, "They feast upon our fear." Her words awakened fresh terror. The chandelier crashed, glass and iron raining down. Eleanor ducked, arms raised. When she looked up, only 4 guests remained: herself, Dr. Blythe, Clara and Professor Blythe, Selena, Joseph, Elijah and Judge Worthington gone. Martha collapsed in spasm, the judge's chair empty and cold. A final crack split the tabletop. From the seam a skeletal hand emerged, Clutching a silver fork, it twitched toward Martha's motionless form, pricking her cheek. She jerked awake with a howl snapping out of trance. Her eyes met. Eleanor's fear and frenzy intermingled. "We must destroy it," she shrieked. "Destroy the table." Dr. Blythe shook his head. "No, the key's turning slowed it. But we need the ceremony's end. The binding, the remembrance." Eleanor swallowed, heart pounding. She stepped forward, speaking to the fractured wood. "Betsy Bell, we remember. We repent. Release your children." At her words, the raven crest glowed a dim ember. With effort, Professor Blythe turned the key once more. The skeletal hand retreated. The seam began to close, but the wood splintered, sending shards toward the guests like splinters of memory. Selina, Mason's sharecropper, regained her feet and picked up the chain of cypress cones from beneath the table. She dashed across the hall, flinging cones into the crack. Each one hissed as it touched the wood, exhaling acrid smoke. The fissure shrank, rejecting the cones, until with a final thunderous snap, it welded itself shut, leaving only a zigzag scar across the tabletop. Silence followed, a heavy, choking hush. The candles flickered back to life. The doors creaked open. Outside, rain sluiced over marble steps. The storm had broken. Inside, the table sat whole again, but its grain bore the wound of its witness. One by one, the remaining guests, Clara supporting Martha, Blythe aiding Judge Worthington, Selina and Elijah, emerging from shadow, found themselves reduced trembling survivors. Around that silent board, the final guest, Eleanor Bell, stood alone at the head, eyes fixed on the ravaged wood where laughter had turned to death. Ravenwood Hall had reclaimed its secret, and the Bell family's last feast had become their darkest hour. In 2022, Dr. Marissa Caldwell, a historian of Southern Gothic folklore, led a team to trace Ravenwood Hall's dark legacy. Their first discovery lay buried in the South Carolina Department of Archives. A bundle of brittle letters tied with a faded ribbon, penned by Elizabeth Betsy Bell herself. One letter, dated April 10, 1823, read, "You must protect the line at all cost, Betsy. The table is our family's keystone. Guard it with your life." Rediscovered Plantation Ledger. Next, Caldwell's team examined the original Bell & Son Timber Co. ledger, recently digitized by the University of South Carolina. Entries from early 1823, detailed, Invogen, 27 a 1,000 board feet Haintwood Oak, $1,200 delivery to Ravenwood Hall. Payment method, heirs promise. Marginalia likely Betsy's scribbled, wood soaked with bondage and blood. These records confirmed that the table's oak came from the dismantled slave quarters, binding the fruits of enslavement to family comfort. Betsy Bell's hidden diary, in a collapsed servants' quarters on the Ravenwood grounds. Archaeologists uncovered a metal strongbox containing Betsy's personal diary. Its opening entry, dated May 10, 1823. The night the table was completed, described a clandestine supper. "We tasted terror as I offered Andrew the poisoned wine. He fell amid laughter. The table drank his life. I sealed the ritual with my blood." Subsequent pages detailed Betsy's mounting guilt, ghostly footsteps in the halls, servants refusing to enter the dining room, and the strange phenomenon of silverware clinking in empty rooms. The final page, smudged and stained, read simply, "Forgiveness must be shared, or the Raven's key will never rest." 19th century newspaper accounts. Caldwell's team then combed through microfilm of 19th century newspapers at the Charleston Library Society. An 1875 item in the Charleston Courier reported, "Ravenwood Hall sale halted amid strange illnesses. Officials cite collapse of multiple visitors at private supper cause undetermined." A follow-up piece noted that Ravenwood sat abandoned for decades thereafter, its grand table left intact but rotting. Oral histories and WPA interviews. During the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration recorded local recollections. In one interview, an elderly sharecropper recalled, "My granny said the bell table whispered in the night, calling children away. Another interview with a former Ravenwood cook described hidden trapdoors under the floorboards believed to conceal victims of Betsy's poisoning. Material evidence. Table fragment. Finally, in 2021, a fragment of Ravenwood's original table leg rescued from the cookhouse ruins underwent dendrochronological analysis. The oak's growth rings matched Haintwood's specimens precisely, and trace analysis revealed microdroplets of arsenic embedded in the grain. Scholarly conclusions. In a 2023 journal article, Caldwell and colleagues concluded, blood covenant, ledger, letters and diary unequivocally document Betsy Bell's ritual murder and blood sealing of the table. Material memory. The Haintwood oak, saturated with violence and betrayal, carried a curse realized whenever heirs died without atonement. Cultural legacy. Newspaper reports and oral histories demonstrate Ravenwood's prolonged abandonment and the table's role in local folklore. These findings confirm that the Bell family's sins became literal wood-engraved memory, demanding annual remembrance lest vengeance find new victims. Only by resurrecting the atonement ritual, blood, forgiveness, and communal feasting could descendants finally lay the Raven's key to the Bell family's last feast reminds us that the most elegant tables can conceal the darkest legacies. Trust, once offered in good faith, over crystal goblets and shared toasts, became the very mechanism of retribution when secrets soaked into the wood. Each crack in that mahogany board was a line of history written in blood and betrayal, demanding that the descendants confront the sins of their forebears or be devoured by them. At its core, this story is about heritage, how what we inherit is not only land or wealth, but also the echoes of choices made long before we were born. Betsy Bell's decision to bind her family's honor to a dinner table may have seemed an act of preservation in 1823, but it became a curse that tore through generations until Eleanor Bell and her allies had the courage to uncover and atone for the crime. Their willingness to draw blood, speak forgiveness, and face the Raven's key head-on broke the cycle of vengeance and reclaimed hospitality from horror. Trust, too, proves fragile and precious. Eleanor's guests entered Ravenwood Hall expecting camaraderie and renewal. Instead, they found themselves up against a curse that tested every ounce of their faith in each other and in the very furniture meant to bring them together. In that crucible, true alliance formed. Neighbors who might have once quarreled united to confront a threat born of the past. It was only through collective reckoning, through shared confession, shared ritual, and shared sacrifice that they survived the table's wrath. Now we turn the story to you. What do you believe was the most crucial act of courage at that final supper? Was it Eleanor Bell's decision to seek out the ledger and Betsy's diary? Or perhaps Joseph's protection of his aunt as chairs collapsed around them? Could the Bell family have avoided catastrophe by honoring the binding ritual from the outset? Have you encountered tales where heirlooms carried legacies as brutal as this cursed table? Drop your theories in the comments below. We love reading your insights and featuring the most compelling ideas in our next episode. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a Southern Gothic mystery, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories where history bleeds into horror. Ring the bell to stay notified because our next chapter takes us to the windswept highlands of Scotland. For 1692, The Covenanter's Curse, when secret prayers called down fury. We'll explore forbidden worship, a massacre in the dark, and a hidden covenant that even death couldn't silence. Until then, remember, the past is never truly buried, and the furniture upon which we feast may hold more than just fine china. It may bear the weight of ancestral sins, waiting for the next generation to either heed the warning or become part of the reckoning.